Ubisoft made a game with an average critic score of 87% and a 95% recommendation, and it turns out that barely mattered, and now Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown's team has been disbanded. That's also where things get interesting. There are some leaks. Ubisoft's expectations were rather high, their go-to-market plan was weak, and the road to completion and what's next is not necessarily simple because they are a company under a lot of external pressure. Here's how it all went down. Over the last few weeks, Ubisoft's public profile has been a raging inferno. It's been on fire, and French outlet Origami just poured some more oil onto it. They published a report alleging that Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown's team has been disbanded, with the decision being made just months after the game's launch. The overall claim is simple: poor sales across all platforms. Other projects could of course benefit from those staff, so the opportunity cost of doing another expansion for The Lost Crown beyond the one they've committed to would be too high, and then sequel plans died over concerns that the sequel would cannibalize the long-term sales of The Lost Crown. And funnily enough, they may have Nintendo to thank for that one. So basically, you can release a fantastic single-player game in a known piece of intellectual property with no live service bullshit and find no success. This game being the first Prince of Persia in a decade and being released on the 35th anniversary, well, turns out that doesn't really mean anything. It's good for a press release, but obviously it didn't have any meaningful cut-through with audiences. The good news is that today we actually know more. Insider Gaming's very talkative Ubisoft sources have, of course, had something to say on this, and it's something that we can get into with the help of today's sponsor. We're going to teach you back-end development with Python and Go. They are boot.dev, and they're not just any programmers, they're programmers a bit like you and me, and literally, they actually reached out because they're viewers of the channel. Now, back-end development is essentially building a lot of the functionality, learning how to fire up a database and build something that people can actually use. And professionally, you're looking at average salaries of 100 grand, flexible working, that kind of thing. Personally, though, well, you'll do fun things like learn Python. Once you've done that, why not try building, say, a Discord bot for yourself? That's the sort of thing you can do. Now, their platform has got achievements, XP, quests, even community boss battles, and they're always developing it with more content. They have monthly patch notes. As an example, they've just released their memory management course, which certainly brings me back to some of my uni days. And to go alongside their site, there's lots of free content. They've actually got a 7-hour walkthrough of their Python course, which basically means you can get started and have that there to back you up. They've got explainers and key concepts, and what was interesting to me is they've just shipped a functional programming walkthrough, which is fun because I was 100% object-oriented by training. So, computers are awesome, and with these skills, you can do cool things on computers, you can up your job prospects, and even better, at boot.dev/Bellular News, you get 25% off your first purchase. Technically, to save the most, you can do that on the annual plan, and if it's not for you, they've got the 30-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. The first thing today is expectations. Ubisoft allegedly expected this game to sell millions of units. Yes, millions. And it may seem a bit insane, but you can actually see the logic here. Ubisoft Montpellier are one of their top teams. They have made absolutely awesome games. A great example of that is, of course, their Rayman work, which sold really well. Also, Metroidvanias are fairly popular these days. You see loads of them in Steam. There's the obvious example of Hollow Knight, which did extremely well and kind of got people back into the genre, but there is a drip feed of games, and there's larger hits. You've got Bloodstained, Blasphemous. Both of those are north of 2 million units by now, and over in Nintendo land, there's Metroid Dread. That shifted 3 million units in just over a year, and only on the Switch. So for Ubisoft, you can see why multi-platform, big IP, they expected more. What they got, though, was 300,000 sales by the end of January. That's an estimated $15 million of revenue, which they won't be thrilled about, especially because you've got to slash off some lovely store fees, payment processing, taxes, and all of that. And by now, including the Steam launch, the game has just passed 1 million sales. And yes, it is the case that it hit Steam late, only in August this year, but 2.5 months on, it only has 1,300 reviews in Steam, which is honestly not a lot of reviews for a game of this size, and it does indicate kind of soft sales on the Steam platform. So the question then is why? This is a well-known IP, it's in a genre that is proven to sell well, and it's Prince of Persia. You might remember Sands of Time, yes, but Prince of Persia originally is a 2D side-scroller. So what gives? First, there's a trend that's often not talked about, and that's just that 2024 is remarkably shit for the games industry. We've got jokes in the office that basically Helldivers 2 and EA College Football have just kind of propped up the whole industry stats, which is sort of a joke, but it's also sort of not when you take a look at the numbers. Second, Ubisoft's name. I don't think I need to say anything else there. Third, Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia is a great well-known IP, but it is a fumbled one. Take Forgotten Sands, that was generally good, but it was 14 years ago, and it came just 2 years after a Prince of Persia game that was a failed reboot attempt. And since then, oh boy, since then it's not been great. Here's Prince of Persia Escape. On the mobile, yes, it's a Prince of Persia runner game. There's also the thrilling Prince of Persia Escape 2, and they also did a remake of Prince of Persia 2 on mobile that actually looks like it could be decent, but doesn't matter, it's on mobile. You've then got the Sands of Time remake. The trailer for that initially was so bad that they changed the team in the game and they indefinitely delayed the project. So, what this is a deeply fumbled franchise. Lost Crown was a 2.5D Metroidvania, not a big 3D action game, which is what most people sadly do associate Prince of Persia with because of those games from the 2000s. And then there's the point of cannibalization, and that's where they learned a bit of a lesson from Nintendo. And that's actually something I mean quite directly. You've got Mario plus Rabbids Spark of Hope. They've worked with Nintendo before. The thing is, Spark of Hope actually sold softly, and at the time, they revealed that Nintendo advised them that they probably shouldn't have released 2 entries in that series within the same console cycle. Now, of course, whenever we think about a third-party publisher, especially Ubisoft, we think of yearly Assassin's Creed games back in the day. They need to get product out. But you take a look at Nintendo and it's obviously different. Nintendo spaces their releases out such that their players are ravenously hungry. You know what Nintendo fans can be like. And for some numbers here, the original Mario plus Rabbids sold incredibly well over time. It amassed 10 million sales over 6 to 7 years. But the follow-up didn't do that well. So with sales like that for the original, why would you pour time into a sequel that's likely to sell worse and then cannibalize the sales that you were already getting? That is at least Nintendo's logic, but it is one thing that's backed up by some of Nintendo's business strategy. They do not discount. They very much stand by the value of their games, and they do not do deep sales in the way that Ubisoft does. I think we all remember the likes of Avatar Frontiers of Pandora being ludicrously discounted within only a few months. But anyway, let's return to insider gaming sources to see how Ubisoft runs things. Okay, from Prince of Persia Lost Crown to Ghost Recon. For you and me, that may seem like a completely insane way for some of these staff to go. It's actually not that insane because Ubisoft Montpellier have worked on loads of different projects. So the deal is this. Lost Crown was greenlit in and around 2020. That was around the time where Ubisoft had slashed their release slate to pieces after Ghost Recon Breakpoint flopped. Yes, that was 4 years ago now. I hope you feel as old as I do. Now, developers told Insider Gaming that Lost Crown was a perfect project. They said it was straightforward and that was a luxury that other Ubisoft teams do not have, which, of course, looking at Ubisoft is hardly a surprise. As an example, just this month, we have seen waves of strikes. Pretty rough. Now, the Lost Crowns team will find themselves split in a few different places. Most are going to stay at the Montpellier studio, and they're going to be working on Beyond Good and Evil 2. That is the famous Ubisoft AAA project first announced in 2008. But I don't think that really counts because it was then re-announced in its current form in 2017. Now, that's the studio's main project, and it's been a mess. So Michel Ancel, who's the creator of Rayman and Beyond Good and Evil, was ousted over toxic leadership allegations. Sources then blame his replacement for the delays, and that replacement has now been replaced by another guy who's a 30-year vet who they're framing as a bit of a steady hand. But that's actually not all the trouble the project has had. The other one is a lot more tragic, basically the untimely death of the game's creative director, Emile Morel, in 2023, which obviously impacted the team pretty damn deeply, and they're now trying to follow their late creative director's direction under their new creative director, who is also Ubisoft's VP of Global Creative. Now, on that project, 2 sources told Kotaku that the game passed an internal milestone with positive feedback, which I suppose is a good thing, but then again, thinking about the timeliness of that, maybe Ubisoft have realized that their quality bar has got to, go up a little bit. So that project's where most of the staff are, but certainly not all of them. There is a Rayman remake that is being explored with Michel Ancel Consulting, which is something that insider gaming sources say people in the development team are not really best pleased about. Now, this is being led by Ubisoft Milan, who are the Mario and Rabbids people, and they're going to need the help. The reason why is their senior leadership, like most of them, left to form an indie studio. So yeah, that's kind of rough. Now, other people are on Ghost Recon, which Montpellier have worked on before. And what's interesting to me across all of this, and even Ubisoft projects in the past, is there are no mass layoffs here, right? Normally, whenever stuff like this happens, you see teams being gutted. Take a look at Blizzard. Whenever the survival game died and Overwatch 2 PvE was cancelled, those teams were goddamn obliterated. Even though, what's the next project that some of those people are going to be going on to? It's a big StarCraft shooter, which makes you think, well, gee, you probably could have used that talent that you fired. So at the very least, it seems with Ubisoft, they do want to retain talent. I mean, also, they're Ubisoft. They probably know it's hard to get people back once they've lost them. So to put all this in context and to understand the sorts of decisions they're making at the top, we gotta put that in the context of the rather unique pressures that Ubisoft find themselves under right now. It's hard to speedrun the entire Ubisoft situation, but here's at least a good attempt at it. So, Ubisoft at one point had to fend off a hostile acquisition attempt by Vivendi. Now, to fend that off, the Guillemets, who are basically the family that started Ubisoft, especially Yves Guillemot, who is the main man, the CEO, he brokered a deal with Tencent. Now, that basically meant that the Guillemets and Tencent had shored up control such that Ubisoft could not be swiped away like, say, Gameloft was swiped away from the Guillemets. Now, this meant that they've got quite a lot of control. Where things have got interesting is a group called AJ Investments. They started entering a position in Ubisoft whenever the stock was really cheap. They then issued this absolutely scathing, public open letter that was tearing into the leadership decisions that Ubisoft were making. And even though they only had a very, very small, ownership of the company, it was basically them trying to rally up stuff, change how the stock was operating, and obviously for them, hopefully, get some more money. Now, their letter said this, quote, "Lost Crown was okay, but not very impressive as no one talks about the game anymore." And according to them, quote, "Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Tommy Clancy's, Just Dance, Crew, Rayman, and others are extraordinary." And yes, you heard that right, they wrote Tommy Clancy's. Who knows, maybe his loved ones call him Tommy. A bit weird. Anyway, these pressures basically suck for the leadership at Ubisoft. Their stock was plummeting and plummeting and plummeting, and it actually recently surged because people thought there would be some sort of deal to take Ubisoft private. Anyhow, these are a lot of pressures, and you can see how greenlighting another Lost Crown wouldn't really make sense given those pressures, but Rayman actually may make sense given those pressures. I mean, at the very least, Rayman is actually mentioned in that letter. So as it pertains to this story, cancelling Beyond Good and Evil 2 would obviously have them throwing away years and years and years of work, and it would leave them with hundreds of developers without a game, which is a real problem. Ubisoft are obviously keen to retain talent. They've continually showed that and how they do not just completely fire teams all the time, but they have that problem where they can't put literally everybody on Assassin's Creed. So if they can Beyond Good and Evil 2, they'd have a strange position with staff, they'd have another bad story that they can't really afford. So keeping that project going, but then moving spare staff onto sure bets does actually make sense, especially, say, Ghost Recon and Rayman. We know that they want Ghost Recon back after they completely shafted it last time. And on Rayman, you may just think, Rayman, little 2D buddy. No, well, Rayman Legends accrued 4.5 million sales over 6 years. That's not the most crazy sales in the universe, but it is pretty good. And with, say, Lost Crown, well, it's got 1 million so far. The big question for them in that game is going to be, will Lost Crown perform over years and years of years as a strong back catalogue title? Because for Ubisoft, the performance of their back catalogue is one of the big things that holds them up. And that's probably why, thinking about the advice they got from Nintendo, it would not make sense to do another Lost Crown, because you basically wouldn't really increase your back catalog sales that much, and you just kind of cannibalize the game that's already there. Therefore, it makes more sense to have those staff do a Rayman, because we don't exactly have a modern Rayman. You can see the logic. As for the Prince of Persia, well, the 3D Prince of Persia game is still in the works. The Prince of Persia IP is undoubtedly an asset, though at least in the very short term, it's one that's de-risked through licensing, because just 4 months after Lost Crown, the Rogue Prince of Persia launched on Steam Early Access. It's being handled by an indie team. But as for the big title, well, that's going to be 2026's Sands of Time remake. Again, remake, not remaster. That's why whenever the 2020 trailer was seen, and it looked like a remaster, not a remake, people basically said, what the hell's going on? As for this project, all we've seen is this shot of a candle. Yeah, who really knows? I would not hold my breath for 2026. Though, if you're Ubisoft, actually landing this is something that is important. I don't think that Prince of Persia is ever going to be an Assassin's Creed-sized franchise, though funnily enough, Assassin's Creed only exists because, well, it was originally supposed to be a Prince of Persia title. But still, taking a look at today's market, you do see that single-player action games of different varieties actually can do quite well in the market. I think there is space for that, but for that to be worth anything, they've absolutely got to get Sands of Time right. And speaking of assets being worth something, do you know what really was not worth anything? Firewalk Studios to Sony. Check out this story next, because it's not just, oh, the Concord studio's gone. No, it's the other side of things that's going on with the game Marathon from Bungie that does seem a little bit embattled, and just the sheer scale of Sony's financial loss. So check it out next.